Hello viewer, welcome to this week's episode of the Weekly Review. My name is Alex Njiiri, I'm your host. Joining us for today's conversation, we have a guy who wears many hats. He's a media and communication expert, a university don, and a public and political commentator. Welcoming Dr. Kamau to the set.
Thank you.
Daktari, karibu sana.
Asante sana. Thank you for having me.
How have you been?
I've been okay. Happy to be here.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Now, this week has been quite heavy week. I think after what looked like a lull in politics, we've seen heightened political moves. We saw the big interview by the Deputy President last week at the tail end. And of course, the discussions around the economy also continue to dominate the local scenes. So I want you to just paint for us a picture of where we are at in terms of the economy.
I would say it's somewhere in between, because the state of the Kenya's economy is also the state of the global economy. And I think we have to look at it in the context of what is happening globally. Because with COVID-19, hitting every part of the world in 2020, priorities for all nations had to change. And especially if you remember the initial days when we didn't know much about the pandemic. There was a lot of perhaps panic in the initial stages. But once the containment measures came in place, and that was the priority at that particular point in time, we started to see that for many, countries and those ones that, instituted the containment measures, the immediate question that came up was, how will people survive? And people started thinking about their livelihoods. So that balance forced many governments now to think and look at their priorities.
Right.
And if you remember the case of Kenya, just in January of 2020, the president addressed the nation and said that he had some specific priorities that he wanted to pursue. Spoke about agriculture, reforms in agriculture, and what he wanted to achieve. But that was quickly disrupted because by around March, COVID and the fears around it required that government would look at their priorities and start now instituting certain measures, which meant, number one, is we had to have what we call increased spending in healthcare. And that, of course, gobbled up a significant part of the budget. The second issue was because of the containment measures and the impact they were having on people. Then you also had to increase spending around social protection. Then related to that, there are certain measures that had to be put in place in terms of cushioning the people from all these ravages of the pandemic. So a whole year of that meant, therefore, the priorities changed. What the president had said in the beginning, now we had to move the focus from those things to first focus on COVID-19. So it means also the government's ability now to collect taxes so that we can continue and revenue. These things were affected. And ultimately, is the projected growth of the economy that was envisioned happened globally, ended up contracting. And while there have been, perhaps towards the end of 2020, where there were significant signs that the growth, was coming back in 2021, we now realize that the situation is still alive. So when you look at the state of the economy, Kenyan economy, you have to look at it in the context of what's happening around the globe. But to respond to your question more specifically, it's not that bad, it's not that negative, because there's a couple of good indicators. Were it not for the recent containment measures that were put in place, the economy, there were signs the economy is on the rebound. I think we saw in terms of exports, there's a report that came out from the Kenya Exports Promotion Council, Keproba. They actually said that Kenya's exports were about at around 642 billion. The other thing is we saw for the last 8 years, we have actually experienced the highest exports to African countries for the last 8 years, which was around 42 billion. So it's not all negative, as the picture may be painted.
Right. And that is all good, But there's also a perception, from the ground. And, Wanjiko, the common mwananchi, crying that their pockets are dry, that a lot of these things, and they're big numbers. For example, our economy grew last year, I think 5.7%, and a lot of the economies globally contracted. There was general recession all over. But economy grew, but there's no trickle down, and these numbers are thrown around in fancy hotels and all that, and you're told about growth, but Wanjiko does not feel it. Do you feel there's a disconnect in terms of our economic system in terms of the money trickling down?
I think we have to look at that conversation at several levels. The first one you spoke about perception is what people are feeling. You have to remember that the bulk of our population, many of the people would say the jobs are the informal sector. That means any disruption in that, even if for just 1 week, people are likely to feel the pinch of that.
Correct.
Now remember, just a few weeks ago, there was actually almost what you call a national outcry. People were calling for the containment measures, the lockdown, because of the reports of, high infection rates and deaths and all that. So it took actually, quite some thinking before these measures were put in place. But immediately the containment measures were put in place, people start feeling the impact immediately because that is the nature of our economy.
Right.
And therefore, people are dealing, number one, with anxieties around their health, but they're also dealing with anxieties around, their livelihood and the ability to put food on the table. So when these recent containment measures were put in place, the impact was immediate. But I would want to say, looking at the big picture, and I'll still take you back to 2020.
Right.
The biggest thing was to protect the economy. There was a shock, the economic shock on the economy. But the idea was to ensure that the impact was not that significant. And that is why there were very specific interventions that were put in place. Because remember, like I said, while the priorities changed in terms of, and I know the president declared, in government that the priority was focusing on COVID and dealing with COVID. And this is not just a health issue. Because while it started as a health issue, it affects every aspect of society. So the containment measures last year were accompanied by, the efforts to cushion the public and from these shocks, and that is where you saw those measures that were put in place around tax relief, around talking to the banks so that they could give people a bit of time, concessions to give them time to repay. It was also about the CRB, rating that people are given, and even the bank transfer, mobile bank transfer charges. So those measures are in place right now with the new containment measures. The announcement was not immediately followed by aspects, or measures to cushion the public the same way. Because remember, and it's almost a vicious cycle. Containment measures are in place. It means therefore the economy is affected and the productivity goes down, and therefore the taxes, the ability to decreases significantly. And yet still people are looking to the same government, to provide this, and that is where you saw now to bridge the gap. In terms of what I said earlier, the increased health spending in health, the government had to look for the facilities, and that is how now the conversation around IMF came in, and then people are wondering, why is this being done if it is not being given to us directly? Because that is what people are thinking. But remember what we said, the outlook for Kenya, by the way, if you read the World Bank report, is very positive in terms of what is expected of Kenya, because there are certain things that work in Kenya's advantage. One, of course, is the youth, the young population that is also quite dynamic. We have a skilled workforce, by the way, compared to many other African countries. It's also the fact that Kenya has the advantage of being the hub, for the region. There has been significant growth in terms of technology and internet connectivity. So these things set, and also a thriving private sector. So these things, according to the World Bank, they put Kenya in a good place in terms of economic growth and the projections. But the COVID-19 disruptions or related COVID-19 related disruptions are affecting that. And therefore, to cushion the country and make sure that these disruptions are not severe to set us or, throw us off the trail of the projected economic growth, then there are certain measures that need to be put in place. So coming back to the question, perhaps people are dealing more with the anxieties of these containment measures that are in place because people are thinking about survival. And when it comes to the question of survival, then the problem looks even bigger. So without downplaying what is happening to the ordinary person, remember the current containment measures in place are perhaps more severe in the five, the disease zone, the 5 counties. But remember, there's still movement of goods, of agricultural produce. Economic activity is still going on. But outside these 5 counties, that perhaps Nairobi being there that controls the bigger GDP, therefore it's being felt at a greater rate. But I said it's more a question of perception and perhaps people's current anxieties.
Right. Now, you spoke about the IMF, and I want us to maybe look at that. We seem to have a very huge appetite in gobbling up debt, And Of course, there was the hula baloo about the 253 to 55, depending on whom you ask, loan that we're getting from the IMF. Help Kenyans understand, because a lot of the times, a lot of people asking, why are we going to IMF? Why not go to commercial entities and get the loans, for example? If we need to do an infrastructure, why don't we get an infrastructure loan? Why are we going to the IMF? And should that then raise some red flags for us? Because a lot of us, we remember IMF and we remember the structural adjustment programs in the late 90s, when a lot of us, probably perhaps our parents lost jobs, then they were civil servants and all that. If not your parents, then it is likely you knew someone who was affected by that. And those were really grim days in terms of the economy. Should we panic when we hear IMF and loan in Kenya in the same sentence?
Again, first I would say we don't need to panic. The other thing is the question of perception. By the way, it's important to say beyond the current loan, the one of $2.4 billion that, the facility that have been given by IMF, it's also important to appreciate, even in 2020, we still got a bit of support from IMF, because IMF is a membership organization with over 190 countries and growing. And that means, therefore, Kenya being one of the members, in the event there is distress or pressure, people can go. And Kenya is not the only country that have sought, but actually almost about half of countries that are members of IMF have actually sought relief from IMF. So this is not unique. And remember, I said it's a facility that exists. The question in terms of why are we borrowing externally, remember the criticism actually before has been, why was the government borrowing locally, and in the process edging out the ordinary person? Because remember, and looks like Kenya, we like borrowing, the Fuliza story where people are able to borrow up to 1.2.
It's in our culture, right?
It's in our culture. The government cannot, ideally the government should not be competing with its citizens when it comes to local borrowing, because that has certain effects. And one of the things when people look at what Kibaki, because people talk about Kibaki, is that during his regime, he made loans quite affordable, and part of what we're enjoying right now still comes from that. But the government, by borrowing externally, allows, of course, to ensure that you and I, if need be, are able to access these loans. Then the terms are also quite favorable for us. Remember, like we said, we are members of IMF. So basically is that you're going to seek relief, you're going to seek help from an organization that you are a member. And therefore, even when you talk about the terms that are in place, and maybe I have to go back to what I said earlier. Last year, the focus was on public health spending, the what you'd call the social protection measures. That was important to caution us, but to help set us on the path to growth, because remember, we need to spend beyond health, and to ensure that we can spur the economy and have some injection towards the informal sector. Then that is where these facilities are coming. And if you look at the conditions that IMF is talking about, of course part of it is we have to tighten our belt, and remember, the government is the biggest spender, so we have to tighten our belt in terms of what we are spending money on, in terms of priorities. But most important, IMF has also been very specific on the projects that we can spend this money on, to ensure, and that is why, to ensure that the intended impact on the economy. Because remember, when Kenya is affected, it affects the region, because we are the hub of the region. So stabilizing Kenya is very important, and that was the essence of this particular loan, to just bridge that gap because of the inability to collect enough taxes and the revenues that have been affected. So the loan helps us to be able to deal with that. But most important is this project that we are talking about. The injection of extra money into this is to help ensure that the money is circulating within the economy.
And does it come with some accountability?
Absolutely, and IMF has been specific on this. In fact, I would say these conditions are good because they help answer the question Kenyans have been asking in terms of when this money comes, does it go to the right places? So
I'll not be walking outside Central Bank and then just
no.
Get called
that cannot
and come out to the
The other thing, this money is coming in tranches. Remember, it's over the next couple of years. So there is a first tranche that is released, and to ensure it goes, and then we keep reviewing whether. So this one comes with more I would say tightening in terms of the accountability question. But I want to go back to another important question that you had alluded to earlier. The feeling that perhaps we have borrowed, and borrowed too much, and perhaps which some people are afraid is, are we going to get to a place where we are unable to perhaps, meet our obligations. One of the approaches that have happened with President Kenyatta's, administration is he went for what you'd call a macro approach to the economy.
Right.
What that means is invested in huge infrastructure projects around rails, roads, and that is why this government has built quite a number of roads compared to any other regime. You look at dams, you look at the rehabilitation of the old railway lines, you look at dams to ensure that we are able to, boost our capacity, not just drinking water, but also for irrigation. You look at the mega projects that have been done around the country, the electricity, connecting, almost every country. You're talking about the port in Kisumu, you're talking about Lapset. Now, while the immediate impact of those projects will, the impact will not be felt in the immediate. In the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we are going to start seeing the impact of these major projects. And that is when now, perhaps at that point where people are worried by 2024, some of the loans are due, at that point you will see our economy will be in a place where, because we are seeing the economic dividends of these particular projects, we start seeing that the position of Kenya will be at a better place, our ability to meet those obligations, but also continue with the development spending and meet our priorities.
But Dr. I think we also contend, and those are good plans in terms of the infrastructure. And I think if there's something that the president has done very well, it's the focus on infrastructure and his record in terms of infrastructural projects. He's done absolutely very well there. In fact, even a lot of his critics will agree that in terms of infrastructure, he scored an A+. But then we then go back to Wanjiku, who then, when you talk about infrastructure, you talk about 3, 4, 5 years down the line. Wanjiku is hungry. Wanjiku has no money in the pocket. Wanjiku is desperate. Wanjiku has lost her job due to COVID. Wanjiku's small kiosk business, she's had to close it because of COVID, because of containment measures, because of the curfew, because she's not been able to keep up her rent payment. And you tell her about rail and dams and the SGR, which are all beautiful things. But what does Wanjiku survive on? What hope does she get? How does she navigate the next 2, 3 years for her to start reaping all those benefits?
Remember what I said in terms of interventions. The biggest question right now for everybody is health. It's survival. It's important. And that is being addressed. And that is where you see the containment measures in place now compared to last year. They are not that severe. What is the thinking is that this is not permanent. I think the only containment measure from last year that has persisted is the curfew, with the hours being varied. But this, perhaps what you'd call the partial lockdown, is a temporary measure because we needed to arrest the state of, infections in the country. Because remember, when people are worried about their health and survival, nothing else matters at that point. So if we can stabilize that, remember there are certain interventions that have already been put in place, some reforms that are ongoing around agriculture, around tea and coffee, which is a good part of, the bulk of our economy that is supported by that. You see those particular reforms, and they've started bearing fruits. So it's not that we have stopped everything just to focus on COVID. Those reforms are continuing. The other thing is there have been a couple of some, government interventions around supporting the SMEs. There are certain reforms that are going on because, again, the small scale and medium enterprises are the ones that are driving a good part of our economy. So strengthening our capacity for local manufacturing, agriculture, again, the one sector that has struggled a bit and perhaps will need much more attention is the tourism and the hospitality sector. And that is why I would say these containment measures cannot be permanent. You're looking at the earliest opportunity that once the infection rates and the positivity rate goes down and you're able now to ease the pressure on the hospitals, then we go back to the work of making sure that we are able to revive the key sectors that are important to drive economy. Remember, the economic outlook is good for 2021, and already there are some positive signs. And even if you talk to the people in the hospitality sector, they will tell you that March was one of the best months. For the longest time, in 14 months, March was one of the best months. That tells you the economy was rebounding. And it is unfortunate that we have found ourselves again with the need to, institute perhaps more severe containment measures. But these things are going on. As these things are going on, there are other interventions that have been put in place and have mentioned. There there is the facilities that the government has availed in terms of, you know, the guarantee schemes, you know, for SMEs to ensure that people are able to access it. So I think with this, I would say, current interventions, and I said it's in terms of priority survival, that is the first, but these other reforms that are going on, they're actually starting to bear fruit and people are starting to feel the impact of that. It is only that, I would say in terms of perception, is perhaps much more, because I said we're also dealing with the question of survival and the sudden disruption of even the little, you know, monies that people are getting. People are feeling it perhaps in a bigger way.
Great. I want us to shift gears a bit from the economy and go perhaps to your pet subject, politics.
Okay.
Yeah? You know, we've seen a lot of political, you know, realignments over the last couple of weeks. We first saw what was termed as a 7-star alliance. Then there was a sacred alliance. I think the BBI alliance at some point. Now we have One Kenya alliance. We've seen some, at some point it looked inevitable almost that the deputy president and the former PM would be in a sort of alliance before that house of cards was brought down, crashing. And then we saw the big interview by the deputy president last week where, again, he denied the existence of such an alliance. Of course, then we saw some photos that were shared. I don't know whether it was strategic or it was by accident. So, I mean, what do you make of all these alliances, all these political realignment? What's your thought?
I think it boils down to one thing. We're in 2021. 2022 is coming up, is an election year. And if you see from the days of multi-party, you know, democracy in Kenya, 1992, 1997, but particularly from 2002.
Yes,
every time, you know, because after people realized that it was impossible, it became hard to dethrone, you know, Moi with, you know, with an opposition, a divided opposition. We started now seeing the leading political players who had participated in the 1997 election, starting conversations. And that is where you saw Kibaki, former President Kibaki, Ngilu, and Wamalo. They came together in what was known as the national, NAK. And that was, you know, the beginning of conversations. After that, we saw, you know, Raila Odinga had moved into KANU. There were conversations, and there were these, you know, I would also say another alliance that was taking shape.
The LDP,
And then, well, that time it was, you know, KANU. And then all of a sudden, we saw them leave KANU and, you know, join LDP. And then after that, they come together into, you know, together with NAK and what now became the Rainbow Coalition, or NAK, that eventually delivered power. From that time, it became obvious that Kenya is a country of coalitions and alliances. Now, fast forward to 2007. Again, Raila Odinga put together a formidable, you know, team that came out of the referendum,
the Pentagon,
in 2005. So we had the Pentagon, and again had key leaders that put together a team. Kibaki, on his side with PNU, Party of National Unity. It was an attempt to bring together again quite a number of, I would say, players and political parties and people who are supporting his cause into an outfit to help him go into the 2007 election. 2013 perhaps demonstrates best how alliances again come together. Some of them quite unlikely, because it was almost unthinkable at some point, given that President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy president at the moment were on opposing sides in 2007. But an unlikely union happened, and they came together in 2012, 2013. But at the same time, we also saw another unlikely union of Kalonzo Musyoka and Raila Odinga, who had spent almost 4 years
bickering and fighting,
bickering and in supremacy wars. They came together. So Kenya has become now the country of alliances and coalitions. So we saw the birth of the CORD,
Has any of your students presented a dissertation on
there are quite a number. We have seen quite a number of dissertations around this. So the point I'm making is a country of alliances and coalitions. And even now, as we approach 2022, we've started seeing those movements taking place. And people are thinking, and it's almost like a repeat of 2002, basically, where we started. You see certain formations. But I would want to say it's a bit too early for people, because right now it's speculation. Every week we have a new formula. We are talking about, like you said, we call it Super 7 or 7-star alliance. We see photos, and we've become quite good at analyzing photos. Unfortunately, people are also playing with our minds around these photos. So today you see a photo of 7 people. Today you see a photo of 2 people. Even Mudavadi, you would almost say he has built his current career out of taking photos at the Musalia Mudavadi Center. 4 photos, and an empty chair. Yes, exactly. And Kenyans are left to speculate, what do these photos mean? Before we are done with analyzing this one, you see again another photo has been shared. Now, all these, you'd say, is testing the waters. It is basically planting these conversations in the mind, these ideas in the minds of the people, and that will continue. But in the real sense, and I'll tell you, because there's a possibility of what you'd call the pre-election alliances or coalitions that are coming together, and those that will happen after the election. At this point in time, I would want to simplify it and say there are 2 alliances. One is the team that has come together around BBI. And that is what you would call the BBI alliance. It has quite a number of people, and most of the prominent players are there. Then there's a second alliance of the people who are, coming around the deputy president. I don't know whether to call it the Ruto alliance or the Sugoi alliance. But basically it's people, a team of people who are coming around him.
Probably want you to call it the Hustler alliance.
Perhaps that would not be the best way of looking at it. But basically he's also trying, filling out. But if you look at it now, those are the 2 major formations. And perhaps as we continue, we'll see the 2 crystallizing.
Great. Now, let's go to the interview, the big interview by the deputy president at the tail end of last week. And someone tells me that people who are good in communication, like you are also good readers of body language. So what did you read of his body language? Because I watched it, and he was very good in sections of the interview. He was sublime at times, and then at times he was subdued. So he was coming from one extreme to the next. You're probably better at this than I am. What do you make of his body language? What do you think he was trying to communicate? Because I don't think his interview was by accident. It was meant to achieve a purpose. What was that purpose?
I would say 2 things. People who have watched the deputy president in the past, in past interviews, especially around 2012, 2013. He's quite energetic and humorous at times. And you remember the interviews he used to do at that point. And even largely between 2013 and 2017. Very energetic interviews, somebody who is quite charming, confident, and all those. But if you look at the recent interviews, I would say appears more calm. Somebody would say more subdued. But when I watched that interview last week, I saw somebody who is under extreme pressure, given what has been happening. Remember, it appears, he started his campaigns in preparation for 2022 a bit early. But remember, he's come against many obstacles along the way. He has opened multiple war fronts, and he seems to be losing quite a number of them. One is around... for example, he set himself on the path of indirect opposition against the BBI. So when, if you look at the steps, because, the obstacles, perhaps also in the face of BBI, BBI was able to garner enough signatures, to be able now to move to the next level before going to the counties. He put in a lot of effort to try and perhaps, meeting with MCAs from different counties and county assemblies. But the end result was a landslide, basically is what you call a tsunami, across the county assemblies. Then there were the recent by-elections. Msambweni perhaps gave him a false sense of, confidence and hope that basically he could, push through, and therefore ended up sponsoring candidates across, different. And then the losses, again, you'd almost call it
dismal,
another,
right?
dismal performance. The other thing is you've heard him repeatedly say that there are people who are pushing him out of Jubilee. So perhaps there's also pressure where his key allies seem to have been pushed out, of Jubilee. So basically it's a point where when he was doing this interview, you'd look at, and perhaps that was the intention for him, victimhood. Because of all these things and perhaps trying to play the sympathy card. There was an aspect of that on one side, but the other side was basically him feeling the pressure. Man can only take in so much.
Yeah.
This is one blow after the other. In fact, I think the current containment measures have helped in terms of easing the pressure because political activities have gone down. So there are all these questions weighing heavily on his mind as I prepare for 2022. The efforts, the investments, the outreach that I have done, is it bearing fruit? And when you look at the picture right now, he looks isolated. Because like I said earlier, the prominent political players are what you'd call, opinion leaders, regional opinion leaders. They seem to be on the other side. And therefore, at this point, he's somebody who is feeling a lot of pressure and also perhaps with doubts. So the other thing the interview was supposed to do was to perhaps also now speak to some of his supporters.
Yeah.
A section of his supporters, because you could see playing the victim card saying that we worked very well in 2013 to 2017.
Yeah.
But after 2017, the president, appeared to prefer to work with other people, and that is okay. He said he was not invited to the vaccination, program. But you could see somebody playing the, victim card. But I don't know whether it is going to work in his favor, or perhaps his supporters will see somebody who has been battered because he's no longer projecting the strength he used to project. Somebody who's been battered so much, has taken so many blows as and losing. And at times people don't associate with somebody who appears weak. So it's a combination of all those factors.
So you spoke about the political isolation of the deputy president.
Yeah.
I think it might have been early last week, we saw a report that he's been meeting governors, and he's been meeting them in secret because these governors apparently don't want to be seen as associating with the deputy president openly, because they don't want to be seen as defying the president. I don't know why that would be the case, but there was, we didn't get an inkling of who those governors were or who the source was. But then I asked the question, I posed to you the question, could it be that perhaps he has an ace up his sleeve? Could it be that he might look isolated, but he's behind the scenes, perhaps talking to some members of what you've called the BB Alliance or the 7-Star Alliance? Could it be that he's quietly going about his business, talking to them, talking to a few governors, who will then, during the home stretch, at some point next year in 2022, probably shift camp and join him? Is that a possibility?
I think it's important to learn from history to be able to predict the future.
Right.
We are not expecting a miracle, that what will happen in 2022 is so different from what happened in 2017, 2013, 2007, 2002.
Right.
The ability to build strong alliances and coalitions is a major plus for any presidential candidate. Now, DP William Ruto has been part of alliances and coalitions, but he's never been in a place where he needs to build one. Now, one of the people he identifies as his major competitor is Raila Odinga, whose primary strength is building alliances and coalitions. Yes. In 2005, in the referendum of 2005, he put together a coalition that ended up giving birth to the ODM. It was the Orange Democratic Movement that led him to 2007. 2013, he was able to put together the CORD coalition. And again, it's bringing people who you thought were unlikely, to come together. And I think that is the major challenge the deputy president is facing. When they worked together with Uhuru Kenyatta, they were able to put together, you remember Jubilee Alliance in 2013 was not exactly a political party, it was an alliance that brought together quite a number of political parties and key players. No, there were more. There were more, basically. Then in 2017, merged, the Jubilee Alliance now became the Jubilee Party. That again brought together over 13 political parties. Now, and then on the other side, it was NASA that was, it was, in fact, just call it, a super alliance, basically. 2022 belongs to the person who is able to put together a strong alliance, a strong coalition. And what are coalitions and alliances in Kenya? It's political parties and leaders, what you'd call regional kingpins.
Yeah.
Now, you just need to look at the current scenario. The people who are recognized as these would call the prominent political players. Where are they? The place you see them, and that is why I said there are two coalitions, where you see them, that is likely to be the coalition that will produce the person, the winning presidential candidate in 2022. It's not too late for him. And what we have seen also in Kenya is that there are shifts that happen very close to the elections. But at this point in time, even when you see the wrangling or some kind of friendly fire within the, I would say, the BBI side, what the One Kenya team, the Sacred Alliance, ODM, and you'd also say President Uhuru's side, one of the things they have in common is that they are all supporting
the BBI.
That is a uniting factor.
Yeah.
The DP has come up with an interesting approach where he says he has God, the people, and what else?
He has God and the people, right?
Yes, and the people.
Yes.
But basically that is okay, but it's not enough. That is what I'm saying, the ability to bring together this coalition. At this point in time, many of the key prominent political players seem afraid, unwilling, or hesitant to cast their lot with him. Perhaps they are not fully convinced. So the person who is able to put together a dominant coalition is the one who is likely to emerge victorious in 2022. Okay. So while not writing off his chances, and by the way, these are not governors. Oparanya, if he met with Oparanya, it's not a bad thing. But you'd see apparently. The people, well, yeah, according to his version, 5 times. And by the even the 23 governors we had, it was said is a source that has been meeting. We were not, the source, they were never mentioned. It was never perhaps it was done in secret. But you would see, at least with the BBI, you can see all the governors, at least across the country, except 1 or 2, are supporting BBI openly. I don't know why their support now for him would be secret. But it is their ability to also reach out to these key players. Governors are okay, but you look at who are the key players. Yeah. And that is why when you look at Western, for example, we know who are the prominent political players from the Western region. It's basically Mudavadi, Wetangula to an extent. You will see now the entry of other people like Mukisa Kitui. Oparanya has been there, but basically perhaps not at that level. Western, and as the by-election, Eastern, rather Lower Eastern, as the by-election showed us, it is Kalonzo is still in charge of that. In the coast region, who are DP's allies, basically? There you can only talk about Hassan Omar, but the other heavyweights seem to be on the BBI side. Yeah. When you look at Northeastern again, perhaps basically across, so he has the support of quite a number of MPs, but the kingpins who are perhaps likely to determine the direction regions move. And this has not been defined, by the way. There is no region that has defined its kingpin. Other than perhaps Western region, that seems at times to,
it's a bit turbulent.
Divide. It's a bit turbulent. Yeah. Basically, they tend to flow in a certain direction, and perhaps that is a good predictor of how things are likely to be. However, like we say in Kenya, and we have seen there are certain coalitions that tend to be formed and formations that tend to emerge very close to the elections. Great.
Sam, I know you're one guy who is very passionate about the unity of Mount Kenya as a region. And Mount Kenya has, we've experienced something in Mount Kenya that we've not seen perhaps since the early 90s, I think in 1992, where it looks like Mount Kenya might be a toss-up, where because Mount Kenya doesn't look like it has a candidate, a credible candidate in 2022, then all of a sudden it becomes, the deciding factor, and everyone is trying to get a chunk of it. Of course, at some point last year, we had rhetoric to the effect that the president had lost Mount Kenya, that his vice-like grip on the region, which stretched from 2011, 2012, was loosening up. Then we saw Sagana 3, and after that, I think, even when you look at how the county assemblies voted for the BBI, and you saw the political activity, it does look like the president has again gained the upper hand there. But we also know that the deputy president has quite a significant following in the mountain. Do you see that still being the case in 2022? And I know you will probably talk about this will depend on the coalitions and the players coming together. But what do you think happens to the mountain in 2022?
I think there's one thing that is predictable about the mountain or Mount Kenya region. And other regions perhaps need to learn from that. The Mount Kenya region is the one region that knows how to act in its interests at any given time.
Pragmatism, yeah?
Yes, they are quite pragmatic.
Yeah.
And the only time that they appeared, divided, perhaps is 1992.
Yes.
Where you had
Matiba and Kibaki. And 2002 as well.
And then 2002, but it's because the options 2002 was basically between Uhuru Kenyatta and Mwai Kibaki. The other times, including the 2005 referendum, they know how to act in what you'd call their best interest. Right. And we have always seen when it really matters, they tend to come together.
Yeah.
If there's a person who has learned that, it's Raila Odinga. In the past, he has invested a lot, even in some key people, basically trying to garner their support from Mount Kenya region. And they have promised him support. But when it really matters, they always go back home. So for the Mount Kenya region, at this point in time where they do not appear to be having a candidate in 2022, it is being able to weigh and look at the situation and see. One of the things is they do not like and do not associate with a politician or a political formation that threatens their core interest.
Yeah.
And I think at this point the question will be, among all the different players and the candidates who will be offering themselves, it is to look at who best represents their interests.
Right.
It is also to look at who seems to threaten their interest. I'll give you a scenario that I think is important to read as we go into 2022. In 2013, when we saw the Kalenjin nation overwhelmingly vote for Uhuru Kenyatta, they were not voting for Uhuru Kenyatta. They were voting for William Ruto. So they voted for Uhuru Kenyatta through William Ruto because they saw themselves there.
Yes.
In 2017, the same thing happened.
Correct.
The biggest predictor of 2022 and how Mount Kenya is likely to play is, can they see themselves in any coalition?
In any coalition.
Can they see themselves in any alliance that is being formed? So at the moment, because President Uhuru Kenyatta is still the regional kingpin, at least that has been evident, and even when he has been featured, perhaps even appearing with the Super 7, the Seven Star Alliance, perhaps it's time for these people to start now showing, basically, in our grand equation and those alliances and coalitions, who is your Mount Kenya person that people can identify with. Now, while the Deputy President has succeeded in getting quite a number of vocal MPs, we'd call the vocal minority. It's a small group of MPs, but they are quite vocal. He still doesn't have the political heavyweights backing, or from Mount Kenya, backing his bid. On the other side, the Sacred Alliance, the One Kenya Alliance, they're meeting together, but they still haven't shown us whether they have somebody from Mount Kenya in that arrangement.
Yeah, in that arrangement, yeah.
Now, that will be the key determinant. But there are two things that are predictable about Mount Kenya region. They will always act in their interest, and they will always vote against any person they think threatens their interests.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough, fair enough. We're coming to the end of the interview. But before we do that, there's something I always do with my guests. And I know that you're a big proponent of the BBI.
Yes.
And in that case, then, I will ask you to, look Kenyans in the eye and tell them what you find very compelling about the BBI process, and especially about the Constitutional Amendment Bill 2020. Yeah?
Yes.
What is it that is so compelling that makes you throw your weight behind the BBI? I
think for me it's quite straightforward. Is what is the big question and the big problem for Kenya? We have seen since the advent of multi-party democracy, since 1992, predictably 1992, 1997, perhaps with the exception of 2002, then 2007, 2013, 2017, the cyclic circle of violence and the disputes that come with elections, there's one thing they always do and they have in common. One, they undermine what you'd call national stability. Number two, they undermine what you call national unity. Three, they disrupt our growth, economic growth. And therefore, finding an answer to that particular perennial question that keeps coming up with every election, I would say is important. As we go into 2022, remember these issues are there. And therefore, while the handshake, that basically was the forerunner for BBI, was able to help us achieve what we always say is was a ceasefire, there was need to structure that ceasefire to become a permanent thing. And how do we do that? It is basically looking at answering several questions that are important. One is a question of inclusion and exclusion, that people would look at themselves and end up drawing two maps of Kenya and say that this is the, Kenya 1 and this is Kenya 2, or Kenya A and Kenya B, because I think I had seen the Republic of Kenya and I had seen the Central Republic of Kenya, people coming up with formations. Tells you there are aspects around our nationhood, aspects around our stability, because we're talking about secession in 2017. So basically BBI is an attempt to fix these things by trying to understand how do we answer the question of inclusion and exclusion. We made progress with the 2010 Constitution by requiring the winning candidate to garner 50+1. But we also learned now with the experience in 2013 and 2017 that two major tribes could basically come together, form a coalition and look for support here and there and end up winning government. But BBI now is looking at this question in a variety of ways. Number one is talking about perhaps reforming the structure of the executive in terms of how it is constituted to ensure that there is more inclusion for more people. But that is one level. The second level is ensuring that when you talk about power sharing, we go beyond power sharing to talking about wealth and resource sharing. And that is why at this point in time, BBI talks about strengthening devolution by increasing the resources that go to the county. And that is what you're talking about, horizontal wealth sharing, that more people have access to these resources. But the other thing is also addressing the question of diversity by ensuring that even within the counties, as in the national space, that more people have access to basic and important services, but also can also see themselves represented in those regional governments, therefore addressing that question. The other one is addressing questions again of diversity around gender by ensuring that there is no section of the community or of the Kenyan society that feels left out. And that is why BBI has some specific provisions addressing the gender question to address the representation of women. It is basically going forward and thinking, how then do we boost and develop our economy by looking at, and if you look at the proposals within BBI, is to see how we can set in place an economic system that looks into even areas that perhaps were previously not considered. So when you start talking about the blue economy, we talk about intellectual property, we talk about the rights of artists, basically. It is looking at how do we reform all these structures to ensure, perhaps now when you look at it, when people look at the government, number one, they feel they are adequately represented, at least in the structure of the executive. At the county levels, where you look at devolution and see that more resources are getting to the people, but not just getting to the counties. BBI moves the unit of development from just the county, as done by the 2010 Constitution, to the ward, to ensure that even the person right there at the ward level is able to access what you would call the development resource and the ability to spark growth and development at that level. But the other thing that BBI does is to right the wrongs that some people feel were not addressed by the 2010 Constitution. And that is questions around representation. Where you look at the distribution, perhaps, of the electoral units when you talk about the constituencies and the MPs who come with these particular electoral units, and to see are they fairly distributed. So it's an attempt to right those wrongs by ensuring that different regions, and it's not just one region that stands to benefit. Basically, every region benefits from the additional constituencies, which also come with additional resources and additional representation, which increases their voice in the National Assembly, but also in the Senate. So overall, putting these factors together, I would say BBI is our answer to our quest for nationhood, building our sense of nationhood, is our answer to address the questions around representation, is our answer that helps address the questions around resource distribution to achieve more fairness. It's our answer to the questions of diversity. It's our answer to the questions of inclusion. It is our answer to ensure that it is not just power sharing, but it is wealth and resource sharing. And therefore, for that reason, I strongly support BBI, and I hope that Kenyans will see beyond perhaps the political conversation into what that this really seeks to entrench real reforms that can help our country go into the 2022 elections without fears that perhaps there will be again another disruption as, to the economy and to their livelihoods as a result of disputed elections.
Wow. Doc, had you prepared this for some of your students or something?
I feel passionately about BBI. And it's unfortunate that people just want to box BBI to simply a question of 2022 elections.
Right.
This is basically looking at the past, seeing what are the issues, and we look at how do we fix these things that they will not be. So BBI is actually for 50 years down the line.
Right.
And these are reforms that we have to keep instituting in place. And I am confident that Kenyans will see this and endorse it overwhelmingly.
I love your passion. I love your passion about the BBI. It's amazing because I think when the first report was released, there was a near universal agreement that the BBI was a good process for this country. I think pretty much everyone agreed. But between that and the report number 2 coming out, in between, I think there was a lot of poisoning on the content.
It's the politicization of BBI. And to connect it to something that we said earlier, even the deputy president, who many people think is opposing BBI, he does not have a problem with BBI. It's actually an answer for him in terms of his equations. The real issue for him is that perhaps he has seen out of BBI, there is what I could call the BBI alliance or coalition. That team, BBI is also helping bring together an alliance that he thinks he will end up going against. That is his real
Nothing precludes him from joining the alliance.
Absolutely. He could actually basically join the BBI alliance because the idea is if we can have an election that basically produces a clear winner, but also those who have a significant following, but do not emerge number one, also have a role. And BBI structures and entrenches the role of the official leader of opposition to ensure their good ideas and also the people who follow him can also see themselves represented in the same government, and he can be able to use the structures that are created by parliament to be able to advance the ideas he has. And that is why you saw in 2017, when Uhuru Kenyatta emerged the winner, and the election was disputed. On the other side, they had several options. One was the para swearing in that happened, but the other one was something they were calling People's Assembly. The problem is it is not recognized in the Constitution. But if it is now, BBI has passed and we're in 2017, the person who emerged number 2 ends up in the same parliament, does not need to form People's Assembly, would use his troops in parliament and marshal around the national agenda.
Correct, correct. Brilliant. Sam, it's been a brilliant interview. I think I've found you very engaging, very knowledgeable, especially on the subject of the politics of the day and the BBI. And I hope that at some point in the future, perhaps during the home stretch for the BBI, we'll get another opportunity to sit down and have perhaps a lengthier conversation on the BBI. Ladies and gentlemen, that was quite an engaging conversation with a gentleman who wears many hats, political commentator, media and communication expert, and University Don, Dr. Sam Kamau. We've had a very engaging conversation, and we look forward to having similar conversations with experts and people who understand issues around the politics of this country. My name is Alex Njiiri. This was the Weekly Review. See you same time next week. Thank you.